Hello there, and welcome to FPL Heritage. If you're new here at FPL Heritage, we use history, fixtures, and data to help make better FPL decisions. Now, last week we compared some of the best value players in the game to help build our Gameweek 1 squads. But today, I want to talk about what I think is the biggest strategic decision before the season even begins. Do you bench boost in Gameweek 1? Do you bench boost in Gameweek 2? Or do you save it for later on in the season? It's a question that more and more managers are asking this year. And by the end of this video, I'm hoping you'll have a much clearer idea of which strategy suits your team. I'll be looking at the advantages and disadvantages of each approach before comparing two completely different drafts that I've built around each strategy. So let's get into it. So why is this even a debate? I think the reason this debate has become so interesting this season is because of how FPL has changed. Normally, when we think about the bench boost chip, we think about saving it until later on in the season. We wildcard into a double game week, build a squad of 15 players with 2 fixtures each, and try to maximize the chip that way. But this season feels different, because before game week 1, we're effectively on an unlimited wildcard anyway. We can make as many transfers as we like before the deadline, there's no new injuries from previous game weeks to worry about, no suspensions to work around, and in theory, we have complete freedom to build the strongest possible squad of 15 players. Now, that sounds fantastic on paper. If you're going to bench boost at any point in the season, surely doing it when every player is fit, available, and expected to start makes a lot of sense. We've seen everything in pre-season, so hopefully we know which players are going to be fit and available to start for their respective teams. But there is a trade-off. To build a proper bench boost squad, you're not just thinking about your starting 11 anymore. You're thinking about all 15 players. That means money has to be spread across the entire squad. Instead of having 1 or 2 budget enablers sitting on your bench, you're trying to own 15 players that you're genuinely happy to start. And that's where things become really interesting, because every extra million you spend on your bench is $1 million that isn't going into your starting 11. For example, we'd all love to own explosive players like Semenyo and Mbeumo from the very start. Their preseason has been absolutely on fire, and obviously we want them in our teams. But if you've already invested money upgrading your second goalkeeper, your 4th defender, and your 5th midfielder, suddenly finding those extra funds becomes even more difficult. You begin making compromises. Maybe you downgrade one premium midfielder. Maybe you settle for a cheaper forward. Maybe you sacrifice a premium defender. All because you're trying to maximize 15 players instead of 11. So the real question isn't simply, can I bench boost in game week 1? It's, how much am I weakening my starting 11 to make that bench boost worthwhile? Because ultimately, your captain and your starting 11 will still score the vast majority of your points throughout the season. Now, let's take a look at the draft I've currently built if I decide to bench boost in Game Week 1. The first thing you'll probably notice is that the squad looks a little different to a standout Game Week 1 team. That's because every single player in this squad has a job to do. I'm not just building the strongest starting 11, I'm trying to maximize all 15 players because ideally, every point matters when activating the bench boost chip. Let's start with the goalkeepers. I've gone with Verbruggen and Kinski, 2 playing 4.5 million goalkeepers. Ordinarily, I'd pair a starting goalkeeper with a £4 million backup and save that extra 0.5 million elsewhere. Unfortunately, we don't have a Dubravka this season who's going to be playing every single game. However, if I'm bench boosting in game week 1, I want 2 keepers who are expected to start and both have a realistic clean sheet potential. It gives me 2 opportunities to pick up points instead of relying on a non-playing backup. In defence, I've doubled up on Arsenal with Calafiori and Mosquera. For me, Arsenal still have the best defence in the league, and if I'm investing across 15 players, I want defenders from teams I trust to keep clean sheets consistently. I know Arsenal haven't had the best of pre-seasons, but still, it's Arsenal. I've then gone with Harry Maguire. He's not the most exciting pick on paper, but we know he offers DefCon potential through clearances, blocks, and aerial duels, and with Casemiro gone, he's definitely going to be some threat from set pieces. With the first 2 fixtures of United, you definitely want to target that. Next up is Hume, who I think could become one of the bargains of the season. He's been playing on the right wing throughout Sunderland's last 3 pre-season games, so if that role continues into the Premier League, we effectively have a defender playing in a much more advanced position. He also scored in the last pre-season game. And finally, there's Dara O'Shea at £4 million. He's just good value. He's expected to start, offers some decent DefCon potential, and most importantly, allows the rest of the squad to come together without sacrificing too much quality elsewhere. Moving into midfield, I've tried to balance reliability with value. Pascal Gross comes in a budget enabler, but one with genuine upside. He's involved in set pieces, has penalty potential if he's on the pitch, and has consistently shown over the years that he can take over with assists and bonus points. Gomez is someone who's really caught my eye during pre-season. With Mente currently injured, there's every chance he starts on the right-hand side, and if he does, 5 million could become excellent value. Dominic Szoboszlai stays in my draft because I still think he's one of the safest £7 million midfielders in the game, although Wirtz is coming up and slowly taking over in terms of how he's coming across on pre-season. He should start regularly, gets into dangerous areas, and has multiple routes to FPL points. Then we move into my two premium midfielders, Bruno Fernandes and Bryan Mbeumo. This is very much a fixture play. Manchester United have one of the strongest opening fixture runs, and if their attack clicks early under the new setup, I want to be heavily invested from the start. Up front, there's not much explaining needed. It's very much template. Haaland is a standout captaincy option from Gameweek 1, even though he hasn't had a sniff of pre-season yet. João Pedro looks excellent value at 7.5 million and should play a key role moving forward. And Calvert-Lewin at 6 million offers another budget route into the starting striker position with favourable fixtures. Solanke apparently got another injury in pre-season, so he's a no-go for me. Now, while I do really like this squad, as you can see there's comparisons from my previous draft, there are definitely some compromises. Because I'm trying to build 15 playable assets rather than 11, the money is spread much more evenly across the squad. That means every 0.5 million upgrade suddenly becomes incredibly difficult. For example, I'd love to own players like Semenyo, Elliot Anderson, or even find another route into a £9.5 million midfielder like Cole Palmer. But once you've invested in a second goalkeeper, a strong fourth and fifth defender, and a playable fifth midfielder, there's very little flexibility left. You're constantly making small sacrifices across the team just to ensure your bench is strong enough to justify using the chip. The biggest question I keep asking myself is this: am I actually gaining enough points from my bench to make up for having a slightly weaker starting 11? Because let's be honest, over the course of the season, your captain and your starting 11 are still going to account for the vast majority of your FPL points. And that's exactly why the Game Week 2 strategy becomes even more interesting. Now, let's compare that to my Game Week 2 bench boost draft. Straight away, you'll notice this squad looks much more like a traditional FPL team. The majority of my budget has been invested into the starting 11, while the bench has been built specifically with Game Week 2 in mind, rather than trying to maximize all 15 players immediately. For me, this is the biggest attraction of waiting until Game Week 2. Plus, we get a lot more information from one full game week. Let's start with the goalkeepers. Kinski stays exactly the same. I still like Tottenham's opening fixtures, and I think he's one of the standout £4.5 million goalkeepers. The change comes with Petrovic. Whilst his Game Week 1 fixture against Manchester City isn't particularly appealing, his Game Week 2 fixture at home to Everton is far more attractive, and that's ultimately the fixture I'm planning around if I'm activating the bench boost then. Rather than chasing immediate points, I'm targeting the week I actually intend to use the chip. Defence is where the strategy really starts to differ. Ballard comes into the side instead of Hume. For me, Ballard simply feels more secure for minutes, and he also offers genuine goal threat from set pieces, alongside strong defensive contribution potential. Harry Maguire remains in the team. Again, I like the defensive contribution upside, but this is probably one of the positions that could change. If I wanted to free up a little extra cash, Maguire could easily become Luke Shaw, and that saving could then be used to upgrade elsewhere, perhaps turning Mbeumo into Semenyo. Calafiori also keeps his place. I still want Arsenal defensive coverage, regardless of which bench boost strategy I choose. Calafiori could easily be Mosquera or Ben White, especially with the news that Arteta said that Timber is weeks away. The biggest change comes from removing Mosquera and instead bringing in the Coventry boys. Now, I completely appreciate this is probably the boldest part of the draft. The reason I've gone this route is because Coventry host Hull in Game Week 2. Looking back at last season, Coventry faced Hull twice in the league and both matches ended in a goalless draw. Now, football doesn't work like copy and paste. I'm certainly not expecting history to repeat itself just because it happened before. However, I do think it highlights two important things. Firstly, Hull struggled to create clear-cut chances against Coventry. And secondly, Hull are, in my opinion, one of the weakest promoted teams we've seen for a number of years. They came through the playoffs as significant underdogs, and whilst every promoted side deserves respect, this is a fixture I'm quite happy to target from a defensive point of view. If Coventry can keep a clean sheet, suddenly those two defenders become fantastic bench boost picks. In midfield, the core remains largely unchanged. Bruno Fernandes stays, Bryan Mbeumo also remains, although if I decided to downgrade Maguire, this is probably why I invest the extra money. Semenyo has looked absolutely electric during pre-season, already registering 5 assists, and he's certainly someone I'd love to fit into the squad. Dominic Szoboszlai also keeps his place. Again, if you wanted to spend a little more, Florian Wirtz is an obvious upgrade and gives you another route into Liverpool's attack. One player I really like in this draft is Enzo Lefebvre. He's a nice budget enabler, appears to have set-piece responsibilities, and benefits from a very encouraging opening run of fixtures. then Sangare. Now, anyone who follows me on Twitter or X will already know how much I like this pick. He's someone I actually earmarked before he even moved to the Premier League because I genuinely believe he's an absolute defensive contribution machine. With a solid Gameweek 2 fixture against Leeds, I actually prefer him in this strategy over someone like Pascal Gross because I think his floor is incredibly reliable. Up front, nothing changes. I'm pretty settled on this front three. Holland remains the standout captaincy option. João Pedro continues to offer excellent value, and Calvert-Lewin still represents one of the best budget forwards available. So, what are the downsides to waiting until Game Week 2? Well, the biggest one is pretty obvious. This strategy becomes heavily dependent on Coventry keeping a clean sheet. If Hull score, suddenly a large part of the value behind the bench boost disappears. That's definitely the biggest risk. However, I actually think this squad gives me something that Game Week 1 draft doesn't: flexibility. Because my bench is much cheaper overall, the vast majority of my budget is invested in my starting 11. That means I'm not carrying unnecessary money across 15 players. If an early bandwagon emerges, if someone gets injured, if a surprise budget option appears after Game Week 1, I've got more freedom to react without feeling like I need to tear the whole squad apart. I'm not locked into an expensive bench. I'm not tied to players I only bought because I wanted to maximize one chip. Instead, I built a squad that I think is strong enough to compete over the opening weeks, while still giving myself the opportunity to bench boost in Game Week 2. And personally, that's what makes the strategy so appealing. It's less about chasing the absolute maximum bench boost score, and more about balancing the chip with a stronger starting 11 and maintaining flexibility for the weeks ahead. So, we've now looked at both drafts in isolation, but if we put them side by side, which strategy actually comes out on top? Let's compare them directly. Let's start with the positives of activating the chip immediately. For me, the biggest advantage is certainty. Before a ball has even been kicked, we have unlimited transfers, most players are fit, and we're actively building our squad on a free wildcard. We can handpick 15 players we genuinely expect to play and hopefully maximize the bench boost before injuries, suspensions, and fixture congestions begin to affect our squads. Another big positive is that you get the chip out of the way early. You don't have to carry the thought of bench boost around for months or build your future transfer plans around it. Once it's used, every transfer afterwards can simply focus on improving your strongest 11. I also like the fact that you're taking advantage of a squad that you've carefully built over pre-season. Every player has been selected for a reason. However, the downside to this is obvious. To build 15 playable assets, you're forced to spread your budget across the entire squad. That usually means compromising somewhere in your starting 11. Maybe you miss out on Semenyo. Maybe you can't stretch your verts. Maybe another premium defender has to become a cheaper option. You're sacrificing some upside in your starting team in exchange for hopefully gaining extra points from your bench. And that's a very difficult balance to get right. Now, let's look at waiting until Game Week 2. For me, the biggest advantage here is flexibility and information. Instead of investing heavily across all 15 players immediately, you can put much more of your budget into your starting 11. That gives you a stronger team for Game Week 1, while still allowing you to build towards the bench boost in Game Week 2. It also gives you something incredibly valuable: information. After Game Week 1, we'll know much more than we do today. We'll have seen starting lineups, we'll know which budget players are actually getting minutes, we'll have better understanding of roles, set-piece responsibilities, and tactical setup. That extra information can help avoid some of the mistakes we inevitably make before the season starts. However, this isn't exactly risk-free either. The biggest concern is that your bench boost plan might fall apart before you even get to use it. An injury, a suspension, a surprise benching, or even a transfer in the final days of the window. Any of those could completely change your plans. There's also the possibility that your carefully targeted fixture simply doesn't deliver. In my draft, for example, I'm relying quite heavily on Coventry defenders against Hull. If Hull score, suddenly a large part of that bench boost value disappears. That's the gamble. So where do I stand today? At this moment in time, I'm leaning towards activating the bench boost in Game Week 1. Not because I think it's dramatically better than waiting, but because I like attacking the season with certainty. I've already spent weeks tinkering with different drafts. I deliberately built a squad of 15 players I believe can all contribute points. And if I'm happy with those 15 players before the deadline, I'd rather maximize them immediately rather than spending another week hoping nothing changes. That's probably the biggest reason for me. The longer you wait, the more opportunities there are for your plans to be disrupted. That said, I'm definitely not locked into this strategy just yet. Community Shield, the final preseason matches, and press conferences could still change my thinking. So this isn't my final decision, but if the deadline was tonight, I'd almost certainly be bench boosting in Game Week 1. I think this brings me on to one of the biggest principles I've always believed in when playing FPL. If you spent weeks building a squad you're genuinely happy with, don't be afraid to back yourself. Sometimes the biggest gains don't come from constantly chasing more information or trying to predict every possible outcome or looking at every preseason game. They come from trusting your process, committing to your decisions, and letting them play out. That's always been the philosophy behind FPL Heritage. using history, fixtures, and data to make better decisions, and then having the confidence to stand by them. If you've enjoyed today's video and found it helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We're only just getting started here at FPL Heritage, and I'd love you to become part of the community as we build something special together throughout the season. The discussions in the comments have already been brilliant, so let me know. Are you bench boosting in Game Week 1, Game Week 2, or are you saving the chip for much later in the season? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts because there isn't certainly one right answer. It's all about finding the strategy that suits your team. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all your support so far. And until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.